everyone, I am Brian Easton, author of the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series. Welcome to 2022 and the fourth season of Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter, where we discuss whiskey, werewolves, monster hunting, and of course my book series. But first, the whiskey. Our creature of the night is an American malt from the Virginia Distillery Company. Called Courage and Conviction. Now, we had another one of these sampler bottles on sometime last year, and the only difference between that one and this one is that the one we had before was aged in a sherry cask. The creature that I've got right here is actually aged in a cuvee barrel, which is just a fancy French term for sometimes used to indicate a superior quality vintage or perhaps a special reserve or something like that. For us whiskey drinkers, all that really means is that the spirit spent time in that barrel and absorbed some of the notes and flavors of that particular kind of wine. But this is 100% malted barley, and as you can see, this is just the perfect size for our purposes here at the Werewolf Bar this evening. Happy New Year. So it starts off with some heavy duty flavor, concentrated even. A lot of that is fruit that comes on strong there at the beginning, no doubt taken in no small part from the barrel spice. But then it finishes really smooth with almost a creamy kind of a texture. Now, not a huge single malt kind of guy, as you may know, but I have to say this is not your average bear when it comes to single malts. Well done, Virginia Distillery. Well, one of my goals for the new year is to finish book 2 of the Winter Fox Journals. 2021 had me stymied on a couple of different fronts, much like the Great War itself. And there were a couple other projects that kind of diverted my attention last year. So by way of an update, I am 7 pages into chapter 7 of the second Winter Fox Journals book, and which is largely going to be Michael's war stories. And so barring some unforeseen event, I don't see any reason why I shouldn't be able to put a cap on this second book of Michael's journals and have it to you by the fall, into the year at the latest. So be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll keep you updated on the progress of that as we go along. Well, speaking of my series, for the last few months, I've been reading to you from my unpublished manuscripts, specifically a story called Spirits in the Silence, which is the first story in a sequel manuscript, unpublished of course, called Dark Rivers Run. And I think I said last time that we'd probably finish it up this month, but I miscounted the pages of that story, and so I don't think there's any way that's going to happen this evening. But we are going to give it another installation. But before we get back into it, let me once again add the disclaimer that what you're going to hear is read by an amateur at best, and the story itself, 30 plus years old, completely unedited, and so it's going to reflect some cringeworthy moments maybe. There might be a few cliches ahead, but if you can forgive that and forgive my inexperience in that arena and bear with me, we'll continue now with the next part of Spirits in the Silence. Spirits in the Silence from Dark Rivers Run, an unpublished manuscript of Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. I felt the fire and smelt the smoke again, more conscious than before, but without any way of reckoning how long ago that was. My eyes were clearer, and I could see through a shroud of wood smoke a shade of someone standing at the other side of the fire. My head was numb, and my left eye and that side of my mouth felt dead. I tried to speak. Where am I? It felt so strange, and I couldn't know if my voice made it out of my mouth. The phantom circled the fire and stooped to my side. "Easy, son. You're lucky to be alive." An old man's voice. I could discern that much. Through the haze I saw gray whiskers, long white hair. And for a moment I thought it might have been Michael. There was a fur hat of some kind on his head and a coat made of buckskin. He dipped a cloth in some water and squeezed it gently over my face. I caught what I could in my mouth. I was so thirsty. "You took a bad one. That rifle slug missed you. It just missed your thinker." His voice was kind and peaceful. I licked at the water around my lips. "More," I croaked. He held a canteen to my mouth, and I wanted it like a ravenous animal wants meat. "Slowly, son. Take short drinks." He rested my head back onto the blanket and pulled the flask away. I could see the form of a black arrowhead hanging around his neck. "What happened?" I asked. "Don't talk. We don't want you to start leaking again. You've already dripped blood over half of British Columbia. I got a mustard root poultice on your noggin. You'll be all right if you just keep still. You're mostly just addled now." "You must have somebody looking out for you, Mr. James." I wanted to ask him how he knew my name, but my mouth was like chalk and my mind became a whirlwind of dark colors. There are times when we are only aware of the simplest sensations, pain or cold, warmth or hunger. My thoughts had been only in these basic terms, but as my eyes fought the glare of fluorescence, I realized I was conscious for the first time in what seemed ages. I was surrounded by white bed sheets and the unmistakable antiseptic smell of a hospital. There were stainless steel rails, icy against my arms, and an uncomfortable warmth beneath the gauze on my head. I struggled to sit up in the bed, and as the last trace of the cobwebs cleared, I found myself staring at a man I almost didn't recognize. He watched me, mysteriously, from across the room before I realized I'd grown something of a beard. I fumbled with the guardrail and threw my legs over the side of the mattress, making my way to the clothes folded neatly on the nearby table. I was dressed in a backless gown, naked as the day I was born underneath. Sounds from beyond the room flooded inside, and a middle-aged nurse with a steel-gray bun on top of her head walked through the door. "Oh, you shouldn't be out of bed. Lay back down this instant," she exclaimed. I picked up my Levi's and gave them a shake. "Where am I?" "You're in Wells Memorial," she said as she made tracks toward me. She took me by the arm and tried to coax me back to the bed. "You are in no condition to be up and about, sir." "How long have I been here?" I asked, ignoring her tugs. 3 days. Will you please lay down before I have to call the doctor?" she warned. I rolled her fingers from off my arm. "Go get him," I said calmly. The nurse whisked back to her arm and perched her palms on her hips as she huffed in frustration. "Where's Sheriff Biggs?" I asked her. "Who?" "Sheriff Biggs of Skowak. Is he here?" "I don't know what you're talking about, sir. What do you think you're doing?" she asked in defiance. I pulled the knot loose from my pale blue gown and began to change clothes. Modesty has never been one of my virtues. "I'm signing myself out. Now go find me a sawbone so we can get on with this." She huffed once more and tromped out of the room quite exasperated with me. I pulled the jeans around my waist and rummaged through empty holsters. By the time my shirt was halfway buttoned, Florence Nightingale was back with a doctor. She stood behind him with her arms folded. "You see," she accused, "he's already dressed." The doctor was a thin man, with an even thinner hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "How are you feeling, Mr. James?" he asked in a soft French accent. "Like a buck in rut. But tell me the story anyway, will you?" He approached with his hands in his pockets. "You've lost some blood and have a concussion. You really should be in bed," he assured me. That's what I've told him 100 times, chimed Nurse Ratchet Gestapo. Sorry, Doc, I've got things and people to do. And I proceeded to button my shirt while he waved the nurse out of the room. All right, he agreed. Then at least let me have a look at that wound before you go. I gave in and reclined on the edge of the bed while he began unwinding the ribbons of gauze. Do you remember what happened to you? He asked sincerely. Yeah, but after that I'm a little fuzzy on the details, like how I got here. You were unconscious in the emergency room when we found you. You don't remember coming in? He asked, slightly surprised. All I know is that I was right outside Skowak when the bullets started flying. He stopped peeling the bandages for a moment. A gunshot wound. Well, that would explain some things. The old man, I remembered. Was there an old man with me in the emergency room? Long white hair? Like Jeremiah Johnson kind of fella? I don't seem to remember anyone fitting that description. Is he a friend of yours? He asked as he resumed the unwrapping. I don't know who he was, I had to admit. Well, if he's the one who put the poultice on your wound, I definitely call him a friend, whoever he is. The dressing came free and the doctor produced a small light from his pocket. He examined the wound. Stitches are still clean. No sign of infection. You know, you're an extremely lucky man, Mr. James. Another centimeter, that wound would have been instantly fatal. Whoever your elderly guardian angel is, he knew how to dress a wound and stop the bleeding. He lit me up after dressing the wound with a fresh bandage and put his hands back into the pockets of his white coat. If I'd known it was a bullet wound, I'd have notified the police 3 days ago. I'll still have to, of course. I pulled on one boot. I'll save you the call. I'm working with the Skowak Sheriff's Department. Is that right? I didn't see a badge with your identification. I hoisted the empty shoulder rig to him. You didn't see any guns either. I must have cleared leather with the second Colt and dropped it with the others, I thought. I walked to the telephone next to the bed and lifted the receiver. Give me the sheriff's office, Skowak. It rang twice before White Crow picked up. Sheriff's. White Crow? Yeah, who's this? Logan James. I'm in the Wells Hospital. Logan? Jesus, man, we figured you were dead for the better part of a week. I just came to. They tell me I've been here 3 days. Can you tell Biggs to come get me? Sure. What happened at the cabin? There was blood everywhere. I don't want to talk about it over the phone. Just get Biggs over here for me now. Yeah, will do. Hold tight. It'll take him about 30 minutes. Yeah, just a minute. The doc here needs to cover his ass. I handed him the phone. This is Dr. Ethan. Yes, he seems fine, but I'd feel better if I had a little more... Yes, well, as you know, Deputy, we're required to report all gunshot wounds to the authorities. I would have done so earlier, but the truth is I just found out my... No, it's more of a deep grazing wound than anything. He's fortunate to be alive. All right. Should I contact the Wells police as well? Yes, I'll send it this afternoon. Thank you. He cradled the receiver and adjusted his glasses. He said they'd handle it. That someone would come for you shortly. I waited on a bench outside the hospital, chewing a wad of tobacco and going over the events that brought me to this point. I'd spent 3 days in and out of semi-conscious delusions, but I hadn't imagined the old man. I knew I hadn't imagined the spirits either. They were as real as the things they said about me. I could remember every word, too, and the tongue they used. There was one question from that strange conversation that haunted me, though. Is hatred enough to live on? And the hesitant reply, no. Hatred had been my mainstay since the death of my father. It had been the only fuel that had kept me going. I flashed back to the night the beast first changed my life. Cobbled in the branches of a fir tree, the full moonlight fell on the forest floor like a spotlight in a circus tent. And my father was in the center ring when I watched him be murdered. I declared my own war at that point. Once, I tried to leave the vendetta behind. I tried to forgive the beast for something better. Samantha's love made me want to forget everything except her, and even more so when baby Joshua was born. But the beast hadn't forgotten, and he took them away. What else did I have but hatred? What choice did I have but to live on it? Forgive them again so I can lay down and die? Hatred is a hot fuel. It burns hotter than almost anything, and it also burns just as fast. It'll mangle youth to bitter old age, burn you up inside until there's nothing left but a black smoking scar where a heart used to be. I was a man on the edge of that summer, teetering on the cusp of oblivion, closer to the edge than I'd ever been. Even when I wanted to kill myself, I found reason in vengeance. But it was a worn-out reason, and it seemed like such a long time ago. I'd turned fear into anger so often that I'd brewed a poison inside my soul. I nursed it like an infant, nurtured it as though it were my own child, so conditioned against tears I couldn't have cried if I'd wanted to. Everything I'd learned in my life had been pushed aside to make way for the hate. "Let it turn," I heard my father demand. "Shut it off," Michael cries. I'd been a survivor all my life, and I'd faced off with many a demon, but this internal conflict had all the makings for the bloodiest feud yet. First day of September, and night had come to the naked slopes surrounding Skowak. I sat in front of a crackling fire in my sweatpants, isolated bungalow. What was left of Lord Calvert kept me company. On the ride back, Biggs had told me they'd found Sounder in a single Colt automatic along with large quantities of dried blood. Saul's body had apparently been taken away along with my other pistol, and they assumed the blood was mine. Some of it was, of course. I hadn't told Biggs that I'd killed Saul, just that I'd returned fire. More importantly, I hadn't told him what I'd seen in Kane's eyes. Not yet. It was a clear night and much cooler. Stars dappled the sky like pearls on black velvet. And soon, I thought, soon the leaves would be changing into their autumn clothes. Those that weren't evergreen. Trees are like people, I reasoned. Some of them never change, while others spend their lives doing nothing but. I wished I were an evergreen that night. I began to see that I'd made martyrs of my father, Samantha and Joshua, even myself. Somewhere along the way I'd cashed in the love I had for those people and exchanged it for bile. And what saddened me was that I couldn't even remember what love felt like. I had this feeling I was a psychiatrist's wet dream. The liquor had taken effect, and I fell asleep on the floor. And I dreamed, and I saw Samantha's angelic face smiling back at me as she told me she was going to have my baby. In the pit of my gut, I felt a spark of the emotion associated with that memory, but it was only a shadow and a far cry from the stark reality where I lived. In real life, that part of me was a charred hole. Nothing grew there, was likely to again. I saw my heart as a garden, alive with tender green plants that I nourished and tended. And each time I was content with a plant, a hideous ragged claw dropped down and tore it out from the roots. What it left was a bloody crater of pain too harsh to turn or shut off. Again and again, the garden was fouled by the werewolf's claws, taking a ribbon of my heart under its nails each time and pushing me ever closer to the brink of my sanity. When the pain was too great to endure, I set flames to cauterize and purify the infected cavities so that nothing would grow anymore, so that it couldn't take anything else from me. Then something inside me growled. From some secret corridor of my soul, something stirred. There was an evil there, an evil I had buried and chose to forget. I was rescued from my nightmare by a flood of red and blue light. Such things tend to wake me immediately. I seized the .45 beside me and slipped to the front window. One of Skowak's 4 police cruisers sat with its rollers on in the drive. There was an unidentified passenger in the car, but no driver. Then knocks came at the door, accompanied by the shouts. "James! This is Deputy DuPont. Open the door!" I hid the Colt behind my back as I opened it. DuPont stood with one hand resting on the butt of his service revolver, and his breath a curl of steam in the crisp BC night air. The passenger was still indistinguishable from the shadows of the emergency lights. "What time do you think it is, Deputy?" "Q&A time," he said. "Sheriff wants to talk to you." "Right now?" I asked. "I don't see him." I deliberately craned my neck to see the shadow in the passenger seat. DuPont shifted on one leg subtly to obscure my view of the car. "Waiting back at the station," he lied. Now at this point, I'm not entirely convinced that Deputy Carl DuPont is one of the good guys. Not just because of his uncooperative nature, but because of his eyes. Among many other things, Michael taught me how to read people's eyes, not only in search of the beast, but in day-to-day dealings with other human beings. DuPont's were cold and deceitful as a serpent's, and I didn't trust him. Other than that, I really had no excuse not to follow him. "Fine," I said begrudgingly. "Let me get some clothes on and I'll meet him at the office in a little while." "You might as well ride with me. I'll bring you back later." I guess I was supposed to believe that Carl had become a nice guy, but I decided to play the game anyway, so I got dressed, tucked the .45 neatly under my jacket, and headed out to meet him. I let him follow me, showing no signs that I was on guard, but kept every faculty primed and ready. Something was going to happen, of that I was sure, and I was just as ready for it. Halfway to the car, the passenger's door opened. Stepping into the flashing cascade of police lights came a pair of dirty Carhartts and an unkempt mane of beard and brown hair. It was Kane. In the palm of a fingerless work glove rose the glint of his Remington revolver, and a diabolic smile that framed his face and cradled those eyes ripe with the beast. "Not yet, Kane," DuPont said. I stilettoed an elbow back into the deputy's face before he could free his .357. He staggered backwards, and I raced behind him as I heard Kane pull the hammer back. 2 bullets, intended for me, struck the chest of my human shield, and by then I was squeezing off silver. Kane managed to use the car door as his own buffer as my bullets exploded into the sheriff's emblem. He fanned the hammer of his pistol 3 more times, and they peppered the deputy's corpse. I fired from cover as Kane lunged for the steering wheel and caught him in the left shoulder. He gave a stifled grunt of pain and slammed the cruiser into gear. The rear tires churned gravel, and the power of that big block Dodge plowed straight for me. DuPont's body was sucked beneath the wheels, and I heard the splintering crunch of his bones as I made like Carl Lewis for the trees alongside the cabin. The cruiser bludgeoned into the corner of the house and tore a slab off it, just as I reached the pines. The back radials chewed gravel in reverse as Kane pulled a 180 back towards the access road. I bounded from my sanctuary and bolted after the cruiser, faster than I'd ran in years. I could barely see the taillights through the haze of dust in its wake, but pulled down with the Colt anyway. He was too far gone, and my line of fire was too murky for a normal shot. But me and my .45s, we have an understanding. I decisively directed my sights, made all applicable allowances, and squeezed. Along with the flash and report came the bursting sound of a left rear tire. The dim brake lights fish-tailed, and rocks ground against an unclad hub. A dramatic blast of twisting metal and smashing glass convulsed in a blistering screech, and I was hot after the wreckage, aware that Kane may have leapt free at any point. There was the biting stench of gasoline and hot metal when I neared the collision. The squad car was belly up in a ravine, wedged between the trees and the embankment. All doors buckled shut. I descended into the ditch with the shattered cherries weirdly illuminating my surroundings like a funhouse light show. Silver on call, I worked my way to the driver's side to find the door bore clean through. Scraps of brown hair clung to the jagged edges of the new exit, and ruby-red blood dripped from the interior. Resting on the cruiser's ceiling, also christened with blood, was the long Colt. I drenched my ears with energy robbed from other senses, only to vaguely detect a harried shamble vanishing into the depths of the forests. Gone. My attention back to the vehicle, I hooked the Remington by the trigger guard with my little finger and plucked it out of the wreckage. I'd hit him good,
as was obvious by the copious amounts of blood that dribbled from the upholstery. He was hurt badly, but he was smart enough to run. Now it was my turn to be smart and let him go for now. The blood trail was tempting, but it wasn't a fatal wound, and I'd learned not to stalk a wounded wolf into his own stomping grounds. I'd probed into the mangled chassis and retrieved the mic from the radio. At least it and the rollers were still working. Biggs and White Crow came barreling up the road not long after I placed the call. They saw the fur-fringed donut door and Kane's weapon, and that's when I sprung it on them. Not only had DuPont brought him to kill me, but our mutual friend Mr. Lucas was a card-carrying werewolf. They were born-again believers, the both of them. Back at the cabin, we surveyed the mangled body of DuPont. Biggs was as nervous as a whore in church. "They really did it," White Crow groaned. "They killed Carl. Those bullets had my name on them, and your good buddy here brought Kane as a delivery boy. I don't know what your deal is with these Lucases, but that's twice they've tried to wax me now. I don't intend to let them have another chance." Biggs wrenched his hands and stared at the blood-drowned corpse of DuPont. "Are you with me on this, Sheriff? Kane Lucas killed Vargo." He looked up from the remains. "You're sure?" he asked softly. "Is that supposed to be funny? How many werewolves do you think hang around here, Biggs?" John examined Kane's rem from the other end of the ink pen, while Biggs mopped his brow with a handkerchief. Then John haunched in the beams of his headlight and drew the pistol closer to him. "I'll be damned," he mumbled. "What'll you be damned about?" Biggs asked. We joined him in the lights. "This isn't a replica of the 1843, it's an original." John passed the revolver. He was right. The metal was old, brown instead of bluing. The walnut grips were slick and weathered, and 15 hash marks were scored into the butt frame. One for every man killed, no doubt. "That thing should be in a museum," John casually remarked. "Where would he get a gun this old?" Biggs asked. I handed the pen and the dangling antique to him. "Off someone he killed in the 1800s, I answered. Biggs held it at arm's length like it was going to bite him. I could see the questions furrowing his brow. White Crow looked me solemnly in the eyes. "Wait, what are we saying?" the deputy asked, timidly. I rose from my haunches and snatched my tobacco pouch from my jacket. "If you were a werewolf, if silver was the only thing in the world that could end your life, how long do you suppose you might live before somebody puts a silver cap in your ass?" They weighed the question like a riddle. "Sonny Jesus," Biggs whispered. "You could live forever." John stood up and presented his Ruger Security 6 to me. "Got any silver bullets in my size?" I smiled and turned to Biggs. He stared down at the long Colt for a few more seconds. Then I looked up. "I carry a 9mm, he muttered. As serious as they were, I hadn't intended on dragging the poor bastards into a werewolf hunt. I didn't know for certain how many more Lucases were out there, but I was pretty sure they had guns, and if any of them could shoot like Kane, a little backup couldn't hurt. They believed, which was half the fight, but the other half was going to be a raging bitch. I tucked a quid into my jaw and sucked it. If we're going to do this, then we play by my rules. From what I've seen, the both of you have known all along how dangerous this family is, and with Big Brother Wolf, I spat a brown jet into DuPont's shoes. Well, you ain't seen ugly yet. Biggs removed his hat and crouched next to the body of his deputy. "Lord, I never thought it'd come to this," he sighed. White Crow bent down to face him. "Biggs, they'll try to kill us all now. We can't afford to look the other way, not anymore." The sheriff's stout face grimaced. "This is bad, all right." John White Crow rose slowly, but kept watching Biggs as he told the story. "We've been backing down from the Lucas family for years. They pretty well do as they please without saying sir to anyone. That's what it took to keep the peace in Squawk, kowtow to the Lucases. We never had the men we needed to take them on, and even if we had, we're we're short on guts. We're cowards, Biggs said, ashamedly. What about now? I asked. Sheriff put his hat back on and stood. We can't back down from this. Not like this, he said, convinced. There was a lot more that I needed to know about the Lucases. The time for full disclosure had come, and I anteed up. Kane didn't come after me because he's a werewolf. He did it because I killed Saul, I admitted. You told me, Biggs began. I hit him in the throat, I said. He died instantly. Biggs and White Crow exchanged a glance of mutual understanding. That explains why DuPont let him up here, John offered. Before I could ask, Biggs was forthcoming with the details. Carl owed Kane his life. He was jumped by a Tom lion a few years ago, and Kane shot it through the skull just in time. He owed the whole clan for that. That's how Kane wanted it. They'll really want you dead now. Tell them to take a number and get to the rear, I said. Why Vargo, though? I asked. Neither of them had an answer to that one. It'll be dawn before long, and Levi should be here with the wrecker any minute, John remarked as he leaned against a fender. He ran his fingers through a mop of black hair under his cap. So what do we do now? They both waited for a reply. You guys don't have to do anything, I reminded. Yes, we do, Logan, Biggs retorted, and for a lot of reasons. But most of all because he's killed one of ours. No matter how wrong it was for us to bring Kane after you, he was a police officer. He paused as though he had to think about the rest. And he was a friend. Have it your way, I said. Just know, if you fuck up on this, just a little bit, there'll be fat ladies singing all across the county. This won't be like breaking up a barroom scrape. Werewolves don't believe in mercy or compassion, and they don't understand fear unless they're being taught it. Make no mistake about it, fellas, we have to kill Kane Lucas. If your badge or convictions have a problem with that, then I suggest you take your vacations before things get real disagreeable. Are we clear on this stuff? It's not complicated, John answered. He won't be taken alive anyway, Biggs remarked. Well, don't say I didn't tell you. First things first, I want you to deputize me. If any of this ever comes out in the open, I want a 10-star protecting my ass. Biggs reached down and slipped the red-stained pentacle from off of DuPont's uniform and slapped it into my palm. You're deputized. Werewolf hunting is almost never what it sounds like. It's more like letting them hunt you. It sounds easy enough, but truthfully it was the most dangerous game you could play. But if we wanted to see our next birthdays, that was what we were going to do. With a wounded shoulder and daylight fast approaching, I knew Kane wouldn't be back for a while, at least not until the night fell. I explained all this to the boys while we made our plans and sucked down pots of black coffee back at the station. I wasn't convinced that either of them were actually up to the task before us. They believed, but they hadn't actually had a face-to-face, and odds were stacked that they'd freeze up in that split second that mattered most. But the die was cast, and we'd already passed the point of no return. On the desk before us sat 3 boxes of silver 30-30 cartridges and my Winchester 94. 4 boxes of 10-gauge magnums loaded with silver triple-aught buckshot and sounder. And my lone Colt with 10 magazines of silver dum-dums and 6 boxes of silver hollow points on reserve. I didn't have ammo for the .357 or the 9mm, but I wished I did. I knew the guys were better shooters with their own weapons, but the circumstances hadn't left us to be choosy. The boys surveyed the weapons and discussed the arsenal in front of us, and we took turns catnapping, waiting for dark. Around 6:30, White Crow nudged my shoulder to wake me. Be dark soon, he said. I sat up with a stretch, and he handed me a fresh cup of coffee. He sat on the arm of the sofa, staring out the window at the street. You know, my grandmother was a flathead princess. Yeah, she told me stories of her grandmother and ones that her grandmother had told her about the old times. One of them was about the men who became one with the wolves. I never thought much about it until You came along. Yeah, I have a way with that, I said. I sure never thought they were real, he said. It's not exactly what I always wanted to be when I grew up either, I offered. His black eyes shimmered like tiny spheres of coal. So why do you do it? I want to know why. Why are you the expert? I took a gulp of the hot black coffee and cradled the mug in my palms. Well, when I was 12, I began, slowly, my father was murdered. I watched a werewolf tear his head off. When I was 25, something in the very pit of my soul rumbled and shook. They killed my wife and baby boy. I could go on. John shook his head silently, apologetically. I can't imagine. And no one believes they're real. Not until it's too late, I said. The deputy wordlessly stepped to the spread of weapons and ammunition. I took my medicine pouch in hand, filled with symbols of courage and character, closed my fist around it. Winter Fox had symboled his sacred bag's elements for me when I was first born, and they had never left my person. I'll take the rifle, White Crow announced. He picked it up and worked the lever a few times, then pulled one of its shells from a box. As he rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, the silver glistened in the artificial light. 150 grains, I said. Any more, the bullet will tumble. The sheriff walked into the office from the street, 3 sets of body armor under his arms. He dropped them on the sofa next to me. Kevlar. They'll stop most big bore rounds and maybe give you a second chance, he explained. Maybe against a bullet, not a wolf, I said. I examined one of the vests. How are you with the scattergun, Sheriff? There's not a quail safe during hunting season. Think you can run that one? I pointed at the sounder. He measured its heft, opened the breech, and worked the hammers comfortably. Oh yeah, this should do just fine, he grinned. He replaced the twin barrels on the desk and his smile faded. Jezebel and Damien were messing around the lodge about 2 hours ago. I figure they know you're with us by now, he said, and poured himself a cup of joe. I think it's time for some background on our favorite family. I don't even know how many of them are here for sure. Best as I can figure, Biggs started. Heyman Lucas, the old man, had 6 kids by 2 different women. Ida, his first, took a fever way back, and she died, but not before she had Cain and Barnabas. Old Heyman raised the boys himself until he married Clara Birchtree, who was already pregnant with Jesse from a husband who died in a logging accident. Some folks say it wasn't an accident at all, but that Heyman and his boys killed him. Anyway, everybody knew Heyman didn't have much use for girl babies. And what was he going to do? Clara bore Heyman 3 more sons, Saul, Nimrod, and Damien. The way they tell it, Clara and Jesse lived hard. Barnabas stuck Nimrod in the face with a pitchfork in a fight over a mule, killed him. Not long after that, Clara ran off with a fella from farther north, maybe up around Yukon. He was only around 18 or 19, they say. Jesse got left behind, but neither Clara nor her young beau were ever heard from again. Eventually, Heyman died off, though nobody can say how for sure. They don't know any of the dates and the years that go with the story. It's just what I've heard, a little at a time. They've been up there for years, he concluded. More years than anybody expected, it looks like, John added. So Jesse's their stepsister, or half-sister at best. I could have almost told you that, I said. Don't go thinking she's some poor lost lamb now, Logan. That girl will hurt a man, but quick. She damn near opened a skier's belly with a broken bottle a couple years ago, and that was because he asked her to dance one too many times. She's no angel, he advised. I guess if you raise a dove with rattlesnakes, it'll shake its tail too. What about Barnabas? I hadn't heard of him. Meanest of the bunch, John said matter-of-factly. That son of a bitch sent more skiers to Wells Hospital than any of the slopes. Him and Cain used to have this sibling rivalry, always trying to outdo each other. Cain was always stronger and smarter, but Barnabas, he was mad dog mean and crazy as a turpentine wildcat, Biggs said. Is he the one with the goatee and the curly hair? I asked. Yeah, that's him. He was riding with Damien the day you first showed up. They say he's raped Jezebel more times than the rest of them put together. Raped, I said, but I guess I shouldn't have been so surprised. Biggs blew the steam from his coffee cup. Well, he explained, nobody presses charges. Nobody admits to anything, and nobody sees anything. But she's come to town with black eyes and busted lips more than once or twice. So, if Barnabas and Cain are from the same father, and Cain is as old as we think he is, John hopped up off the couch in silent disbelief. Then there's two of them, he half-asked. I only saw him for a second, and I never did get a good look in his eyes. This could be much worse than we thought. White Crow paced the floor with his hands in his hair, but Biggs was being uncharacteristically calm. For all we know, the whole damn crew are these things, right? Let's run it down, I said. Neither Jesse nor Saul were wolves. I looked for it when I faced them down in the cabin. And Nimrod wasn't unless Barnabas keeps a silver pitchfork handy. What about the youngest one? Was he hurt in the accident the other day, the motorcycle accident? Damien? No, just some cuts and bruises, Biggs replied. If he were a werewolf, he wouldn't have been hurt at all. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. Cain and Barnabas were born werewolves, which means at least one of their parents were too. And since none of the second litter have any of the traits, that means Haman was clean, which puts the taint right in the lap of his first wife, whom I'll lay odds didn't die from any fever. As I finished, the room became very still, except for the low static whine of the scanner. John leaned against the desk like he wanted to be close to the weaponry, and Biggs twisted one end of his slick handlebar mustache. Where'd you hear all your information, Biggs? I broke the silence. Oh, here and there, over the years. Like where? I pressed. I don't know. I can remember Samuel telling a tale or two. I'd missed something somewhere. There had to be a connection between Vargo and the Lucases that I hadn't picked up on. People don't live in the same woods for so long, no matter how isolated they are, without developing some kind of history with their neighbors. And you can take that from a man who was raised in the sticks. I strode to the front window and put my hand against the sill, peering at the shrouded shape of Bison Hill. I could barely see it through the twilight, shadows of the mountain firs. My breath fogged the glass, and I watched an owl gracefully wing its way through the glow of a buzzing street lamp. There wasn't much on omens back then. John, when I first talked to you out front that morning, you said that Sam was buried in a cemetery somewhere, remember? Yeah, Fuller's Ridge. It's about 6 miles from here, John answered. Any special reason why he was buried there? What's that got to do with the price of eggs? Biggs asked. Just indulge me a minute. Why Fuller's Ridge? Only cemetery around? No. Samuel Vargo just wanted to be buried there, John answered. He told you this? Oh, hell, Biggs snorted as he plopped down in his chair. You could count on him bringing it up whenever he talked to you. He even picked out the plot a good long time before he died. So what? I expect he liked the view. Lots of folks are planted up there. It's a nice, peaceful, reclusive spot. And I'd like to see it, I said. Tonight, for life's sake, Biggs grunted. That's right, and for that very sake. This can't wait until morning, John said. What's the matter with you guys? I thought you wanted to kill a werewolf or two. Stomping around a graveyard in the middle of the night's not exactly what I had in mind, Logan, Biggs poorly defended. Oh, what, you think Cain's just going to walk right up and present himself to us? In case it slipped your minds, gentlemen, Cain wants all three of us in the ground with Vargo. Now, I can't think of a better place to run into him than in the middle of nowhere after dark. Besides, I have my own reasons for wanting to see this place. I walked and faced Biggs. And if being in a dark graveyard spooks you, the best thing for you to do is go home and lock your doors. Don't pussy out on me, fellas. You've not even seen Spooky yet, I charged. Their silence was indicative of the disquiet inside them. They were frightened, and for good reason. The daylight had given them extra doses of confidence, but now that the sun was on the wane, so was their enthusiasm. I'm not interested in killing any more people. All I really want are the asses of any werewolves still stalking about. And of course, I'd like to have my other colt. I've got a theory why Cain or maybe Barnabas killed Sam. It's only a hunch, but if it turns out to be right, it'll explain a lot. The worst that could happen is Cain tracks us to Fuller's Ridge. and then we can have our little showdown without somebody calling in the horsemen." "That's the worst that could happen?" John said sardonically. I wrenched one side of my face. "Well, it could be pretty bad," I admitted. "To hell with it," Biggs decided. "Let's get some mag lights and get there." It was a little after 7 when we set out for Fuller's Ridge in my truck. It may have only been 6 miles, but the goat paths we had to take just made it seem like 50. Around 7:30 it started to rain, and rain harder, until we were in a full-fledged downpour. The dirt trails became treacherous clay, and the Chevy began to slip and slide. Biggs nervously watched the drop-off from the passenger side as I hunched closer to the windshield in the off chance that I'd actually get to see where I was going. The wipers were frantic in their semi-circle circuits, and the glass was an impenetrable blur of water. "Shit!" Biggs cried. "Watch it! Watch it!" "You want to drive, cop?" I jokingly shot at him. "Cade's not going to kill us, you are!" he exclaimed. White Crow was more relaxed. "How much further?" I asked him. "Hell, I don't even know where we are." Biggs diverted his attention to the steamy glass and wiped it with his shirt sleeve. He squinted through the deluge. "I think we're almost there. There'll be a 2-wheel trail on your side. We'll have to walk it now for sure," he whined. We made jokes about our speed and how I was going to kill us before we got there, but beneath it all there was unmistakable tension. "Here, right here! You see it?" Biggs finally shouted. I saw the measly little path on my left and edged the nose of the Silverado into it, just enough to give us some turnaround room. We pulled our hats on and checked our gear. "How far from here?" I asked. "Couple 100 yards," John answered. "All right, boys, keep those heaters handy, and if you see me pull down or start acting weird, just do the same." "You start acting weird?" Biggs mocked. John's grandma would have been proud. His jet-black eyes pierced the dark rain with a courage that any Flathead or Cree warrior would have admired. Biggs wasn't as calm, but just as determined, and he kept Sounder at the ready. The way he pivoted on his hips when he heard a noise was proof he knew a thing or two about handling a sawed-off shotgun.
Well, if you made it this far in the story, that you have my heartfelt appreciation and admiration for your heroic attention span. And that's going to wrap things up for us here tonight for Season 4, Episode 1. Leave any comments you might want to down in the section below. Thanks for liking and subscribing. And until we meet up again, happy hunting and mind the moon.